Welcome to Heroic Mission, where we uncover the untold stories of courage, compassion, and quiet strength. In a world obsessed with image, we shine a light on those who live with purpose, not for applause, but because it's right. Today's story begins with a man in worn boots and a silver cross, stepping into a luxury showroom where no one knew who he was or what he stood for. What happened next wasn't just a moment of judgment, it became a global awakening. Stay with us, because this story will change how you see dignity forever. In the heart of a bustling New York afternoon, a man stepped quietly into a luxury Lamborghini dealership. He didn't arrive in a tailored suit or designer shoes. Instead, he wore worn-out jeans, a faded black t-shirt, and boots that had clearly walked through more life than luxury. Around his neck, a silver crucifix swung gently with every step, not for fashion, but for faith. That man was Keanu Reeves, but no one recognized him. Not the sharp-dressed salesman who barely glanced his way, not the polished manager who raised an eyebrow with disdain, and certainly not the customers who whispered and smirked, assuming he was out of place. In a place that worshipped wealth, where value was often measured in carats and horsepower, Keanu was invisible. The crucifix, which for him symbolized humility and compassion, drew sneers, not reverence. He wasn't there to prove anything. He wasn't there for attention. He came for something deeper, to give. But judgment had already walked in before he did, and in a showroom built to impress, the one man who carried true weight wasn't noticed. Not yet. What they didn't know was that this quiet figure was about to turn their entire world upside down. Keanu wasn't shopping for himself. He wasn't there to show off or indulge in luxury. He had come to buy a birthday gift, a special one, for a childhood friend. A man who, like Keanu, had weathered life's storms with quiet dignity. A man of deep faith, who had never asked for anything, but had always given everything. This gift wasn't about speed or style. It was about honoring a bond built in the shadows of hardship, where loyalty ran deeper than blood and faith was something you carried when the world tried to break you. Keanu's eyes locked on the Lamborghini Roma, a stunning masterpiece of elegance and power. But while others saw the car as a status symbol, Keanu saw it as a tribute to resilience, to brotherhood, to gratitude. In a culture where gifts are often measured by their price tag, this one carried something richer: meaning. The dealership didn't know that. They didn't ask. They saw a man in old boots and made up their minds. But Keanu's mission wasn't about being seen. It was about seeing someone else and reminding the world that the most powerful gestures are often the quietest ones. The dealership manager, Mr. Carter, had perfected the art of judging books by their covers. He didn't just see Keanu, he scanned him like a barcode and found nothing worth his time. The moment his eyes landed on the silver crucifix around Keanu's neck, his smile tightened, condescending and calculated. "Faith is beautiful," he said with a smirk, "but it doesn't pay for a car like this." It wasn't just an insult. It was a dismissal of everything Keanu stood for: humility, belief, and quiet strength. In that moment, the showroom floor became a mirror of something bigger in American culture. The unspoken divide between wealth and worth, between appearance and intention. Mr. Carter didn't ask why Keanu was there. He didn't wonder who he might be. He simply saw a man who didn't look the part and tried to erase him with words wrapped in polished arrogance. But Keanu, with the calm resolve of a man who's been underestimated before, didn't flint. He simply asked, "Do you believe in anything, sir?" And with that one question, the balance shifted. In a place obsessed with horsepower, a man of faith had just planted the first seed of a reckoning no one saw coming. The manager's footsteps were polished, his smile rehearsed. He wasn't just selling cars, he was selling identity. And if you didn't look the part, you didn't belong. When Keanu Reeves walked into that Lamborghini showroom, the man barely glanced at him. But the moment his eyes caught the silver crucifix around Keanu's neck, his condescension turned into open disdain. "Faith is beautiful," he said with a tight-lipped smirk, "but it doesn't pay for a car like this." It wasn't just a snide remark, it was a sentence. a quiet declaration that belief, humility, and quiet dignity had no place among leather seats and million-dollar machines. In many corners of American culture, worth is often mistaken for wealth. If you don't wear it, drive it, or Instagram it, do you even matter? The manager had fallen into that trap. He didn't ask why Keanu was there. He didn't care. He saw old boots, worn jeans, and a soft-spoken man with a cross, and decided that was enough to disqualify him. But Keanu didn't react with pride or anger. He met the insult with calm, a strength that didn't need volume. He simply looked the man in the eye and asked, "Do you believe in anything, sir?" The question wasn't meant to shame, it was meant to awaken, to challenge a culture so quick to judge, so slow to listen. And in that moment, a strange thing happened. The power shifted. The man who seemed so small in appearance suddenly stood 10 feet tall in spirit. Because in a world obsessed with image, it's the man who walks with faith, not ego, who truly disrupts the system. Keanu Reeves stood still, eyes fixed on the Roma spider, his hands tucked in his pockets. Around him, the polished chaos of the showroom pulsed with shallow energy. Clinking champagne flutes, forced laughter, deals whispered behind leather-bound folders. But none of it touched him. He wasn't trying to make a scene. He wasn't raising his voice or demanding to be noticed. In fact, he barely moved. And yet, his presence alone began to shift the air in the room. Not because of who he was, but because of the contrast he embodied. In a space filled with loud money and louder egos, he stood as a quiet, unmoving question. What if value doesn't wear a suit? Across the room, a young salesman hesitated. Moments ago, he had met Keanu's gaze, a silent exchange that carried more respect than all the phony smiles he'd been trained to perform. Keanu turned to him gently and asked, "I'd like to know a bit more about this model." For a split second, the boy almost answered, but then came the glance from the manager. Cold, sharp, a silent order, and the young man folded. "Sorry, sir, I'm with another client," he lied, turning away. It was the kind of moment that happens every day in America. Someone with power silences someone with a conscience. But Keanu didn't protest. He didn't call it out, he simply exhaled, a breath so deep and familiar it seemed to carry years of similar rejection. Across the room, a wealthy couple laughed loudly as they were ushered to a private showing, and somewhere between their laughter and the sting of being overlooked, Keanu stood. That kind of stillness isn't weakness. In American culture, it's often misunderstood. But it's the stillness of people who've endured more than they've spoken about. The stillness of someone who knows exactly who he is and refuses to let anyone define him by his clothes, his silence, or even his faith. He wasn't trying to be seen, but in that moment he became unforgettable. Outside the Lamborghini dealership, Keanu leaned against the cool glass of the building, the weight of the moment pressing against his chest like the silver crucifix resting there. He wasn't angry. He wasn't surprised. He'd seen this before. The look, the dismissal, the condescension that comes wrapped in silk and arrogance. In America, we talk about the power of second chances, about not judging a book by its cover, but truthfully, we often size people up in seconds, and if you don't wear your worth on your wrist, your neck, or your Instagram bio, you're invisible. Keanu knew this. He had lived this, and yet it still stung. Inside, the manager poured more champagne for another couple who barely noticed the man they had just kicked out. A small plaque near the door read, "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." Keanu walked over to it, studying the words for a long, quiet moment. Then, without drama, without bitterness, he pulled out his phone and took a picture. Not of the cars, not of the showroom, but of the message that said, without saying it, "You don't belong here." Unbeknownst to most, someone else was watching. A tall man in a linen blazer, likely European, his phone casually recording the luxury experience, but now his camera panned to Keanu. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but he sensed something real, something deeper than luxury. The quiet tension, the subtle pain of being overlooked, the crucifix catching the light, the photograph taken not in vanity but in quiet protest. Meanwhile, inside, a young employee named Lucia had been watching too. She wasn't a salesperson or a manager. She served coffee, polished the glass, made herself small to avoid trouble. But when Keanu walked in, something shifted inside her. A recognition that had nothing to do with fame and everything to do with presence. She saw how he carried himself, how he absorbed the disrespect without bitterness, how he looked at people, even those who looked past him. Moments later, Keanu turned to leave. No scene, no final word, just a man with a mission, quietly exiting a world that thought it had the power to define him. But as he walked out, the atmosphere didn't settle. It stirred. Because deep down, people can feel it when they've made a mistake. They can feel it when they've misjudged character. And sometimes all it takes is a man in silence to make the noise no one can ignore. What they didn't know was that Keanu wasn't just walking out of a dealership. He was walking straight toward a moment that would expose their values to the world. And once the world found out what they had done, the crucifix they mocked would become the symbol that rewrote everything. The sun had barely dipped below the skyline when Keanu's phone buzzed with a soft, timely reminder. Lamborghini Charity Gala, 8:00 p.m. Guest of honor, Keanu Reeves. He glanced at the notification, smirked faintly, and slid the phone back into his pocket. Inside the dealership he had just left, no one had any idea. No one knew they had just dismissed not only a globally respected actor, but the man the brand itself had chosen to celebrate that very evening. The irony hung in the air like unfinished business. Back inside the glass and chrome palace of wealth, the energy remained surface deep. All sparkle, no soul. The manager was still laughing with clients, proud and untouchable, but the cracks were starting to show. A junior salesman leaned in and whispered nervously, "Sir, I think that man might be someone important." The manager rolled his eyes, his tone dripping with mockery. "If he's so important, why dress like that? This is Lamborghini, not a soup kitchen." In a quiet corner of the dealership, Lucia stood frozen. She couldn't shake the weight in her chest. She wasn't just a bystander anymore. She knew. Acting on instinct, she pulled out her phone and typed 4 simple words. Keanu Reeves Lamborghini Gala. The search results hit like a punch to the gut. There it was, front and center. A press release announcing that Keanu Reeves would be honored that night for his humanitarian work with orphans in Sudan and Ukraine. Her hands trembled as she looked up from her screen and toward the man who had humiliated him. She walked past the champagne table, past the luxury cars gleaming like trophies, and paused just long enough to whisper to the manager, "You just kicked out Lamborghini's guest of honor." He froze. All the color drained from his face. For the first time all day, he had nothing to say. Not a defense, not a denial, just silence. Because some mistakes can't be undone. Not with apologies, not with PR statements, not even with money. Outside, Keanu kept walking. Not fast, not dramatic, just steady, like a man who had carried worse burdens than being judged by strangers. In that moment, he wasn't walking away from rejection. He was walking towards something greater, a stage, a microphone, a message. And that message would echo far beyond showroom walls. Because in America, we often celebrate the loudest voices. But sometimes it's the quietest man in the room who ends up being the one people remember forever. The gala lights bathed the night in gold. Outside the luxury venue, camera bulbs flashed like lightning as black-tinted SUVs and high-performance cars pulled up to the red carpet. Celebrities posed. Executives clinked glasses. Influencers rehearsed their angles. But everything froze the moment the low, distinct growl of a custom Lamborghini 812 Competizione echoed down the boulevard. The crowd turned. The engine purred to a perfect stop. The door opened. Out stepped Keanu Reeves. He wore a tailored black suit with no tie, his charcoal shirt buttoned just enough to show the same silver crucifix that had sparked ridicule hours earlier. But here, under the lights, that cross shimmered like a symbol of quiet defiance, and as he stood tall beneath the gaze of hundreds, the room and the narrative shifted. Across the carpet, the dealership manager stood awkwardly in a rented tux, holding a half-empty champagne flute. The moment his eyes met Keanu's, his heart sank. It wasn't just embarrassment. It was recognition of a moment that couldn't be undone. He hadn't dismissed just any customer. He had humiliated the very man the entire event had been built to honor. Inside, the atmosphere swelled with expectation. When Keanu finally took the stage, the ballroom fell into silence. No one breathed. No one blinked. He didn't mention the dealership. He didn't call out names or seek revenge. Instead, he told a story. Soft-spoken, deliberate, and piercing. "Today," he said, "I was told my cross didn't belong near certain cars, that my faith didn't match the leather and horsepower around me." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle, then continued, "But I believe kindness belongs behind every steering wheel. Compassion belongs in every boardroom. Humility belongs beside every luxury." The crowd rose to its feet. Executives blinked back tears. Even influencers stopped filming, if only for a moment, to feel something real. In that single speech, Keanu didn't just defend his faith. He reminded a room obsessed with prestige that real value is measured by how you treat the unseen, the overlooked, the ones who don't walk in carrying fame or fortune. And as he stepped down from the stage, the world saw what true power looks like. Not in the horsepower of a car, but in the stillness of a man who didn't fight with fists or fury, but with dignity. The applause still echoed in the grand ballroom long after Keanu Reeves stepped down from the stage. But the impact of his words stretched far beyond that moment, rippling through social media, news outlets, and living rooms across the country. The story of the man who had been dismissed for wearing a cross, only to return as the guest of honor, hit a nerve. It wasn't just about Keanu. It was about all of us, about the quiet kid who gets ignored in class, the immigrant who's underestimated at the job interview, the single mom who's overlooked at the bank. In America, we love the underdog, but too often we're the ones doing the judging before the story even begins. And yet, something beautiful happened. Because instead of shaming those who had rejected him, Keanu chose grace. He offered a message instead of a takedown. And that message landed with thunder. His faith, once mocked, became a symbol of purpose. His silence, once seen as weakness, revealed unshakable strength. And his presence, once overlooked, became unforgettable. Back at the dealership, change had already begun. The arrogant manager, now exposed and removed. Lucia, the quiet worker who had once polished fingerprints off glass doors, was now promoted to lead Ferrari's new ethical service initiative worldwide. And that same Lamborghini Roma Spider? It was never for show. Keanu donated it to a Christian refugee center in downtown Los Angeles. It would be auctioned off, raising millions for displaced children around the world. That car wasn't just a gift. It became a mission. 2 weeks later, the Lamborghini Roma Spider sat in an unexpected place. Not behind velvet ropes or beneath showroom spotlights, but in front of a modest building with cracked walls and faded signage. Agape Refuge Center. Christian Rescue for Child Refugees. There were no photographers, no red carpet, no influencers posing for likes. Just quiet purpose. Keanu Reeves stood beside the car, keys in hand, as he looked into the eyes of the center's director. A kind woman in her 60s with weathered hands and a heart bigger than any engine. "This belongs to you now," he said softly. Her eyes widened, searching his for a catch. "But it's a Lamborghini," she whispered. Keanu smiled gently. "Exactly. A Lamborghini should move hearts before it moves tires." The Roma Spider would be auctioned later that month, with every cent going toward expanding shelter, medical aid, and education for children displaced by war, poverty, and persecution. For Keanu, this was never about the car. It had always been about the mission, about rewriting what luxury means. In a country where power and prestige are often displayed with noise and flash, he chose silence and substance. And in that silence, a new kind of strength emerged. He didn't need headlines. He didn't ask for praise, but the world took notice, because kindness that expects nothing in return has a way of shaking people to their core. What began as a moment of rejection in a showroom had transformed into a movement of dignity, faith, and compassion. In America, we value boldness, but the boldest acts don't always come with fireworks. Sometimes they come in the form of a quiet man, a silver cross, and a choice to give when it would have been easier to walk away. And that kind of story, it deserves to be remembered. The next morning, sunlight spilled gently over Beverly Hills, but something in the air had shifted. It wasn't the kind of change you see on billboards or social media feeds. It was quieter, deeper. Across the city, in a modest apartment far from the glamour, Lucia sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through headlines that now bore her name. The girl who spoke up. From espresso shots to ethics director, the cross, the car, and the courage. Her hands trembled as her phone buzzed endlessly. Messages from old friends, co-workers, even strangers. I saw what you did. You gave us all a voice. But Lucia wasn't reading for fame. She was reading for validation. The kind that says your quiet instincts, your inner compass, actually matter. She opened a message from Keanu, sent hours earlier. If you want, share your story. The world needs to hear you. Her heart tightened. She had spent years unnoticed, polishing glass while others walked through the doors she never dared to approach. But maybe that time was over. With a steadying breath, she opened her camera, hit record, and began to speak. Her voice didn't shake this time. She wasn't just telling Keanu's story, she was telling hers. And in doing so, she spoke for millions who had waited far too long to be seen. 2 weeks after Keanu Reeves walked out of that dealership, the world looked different. Not because of a viral headline, but because something real had taken root. Lucia, once the invisible girl who served espresso and polished glass doors, now sat in boardrooms she never imagined entering. Her title? Director of Ethics and Humanized Service for Lamborghini Global Partners, a position that hadn't existed until she proved the need for it. She wasn't there for show. She was there to speak the truth, to remind the brand and the world that humanity doesn't fade under luxury. It thrives within it when we choose to see it. She traveled to Berlin, São Paulo, Tokyo, training sales teams, addressing executive councils, and rewriting what it means to serve. Her name wasn't just on a badge anymore, it was on a movement, one rooted in listening and respect, and in the simple but radical idea that every customer is a human being first. One evening, as she stood on a rooftop in Rome, the sky washed in pink and gold, she opened an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. I didn't change the world, but maybe I nudged it. She smiled, folded it gently, and looked up. Yes, she thought, a nudge is all it takes, when it's in the right direction. They say in America that real change doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and sometimes it drives quietly into the hearts of those who need it most. In downtown Los Angeles, far from red carpets and velvet ropes, the Lamborghini Roma Spider sat gleaming in front of the Agape Refuge Center, a safe haven for child refugees. No flash, no press, just purpose. Keanu Reeves stood beside the center's director, a humble woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, and handed her the keys. This belongs to you now, he said softly. She looked at him in disbelief. But it's a Lamborghini. His reply was simple and unforgettable. Exactly. A Lamborghini should move hearts before it moves tires. That car would later be auctioned to raise millions for displaced children across the world. But in that quiet moment, no applause was needed. Because generosity, in its truest form, isn't loud. It's intentional. It's sacrificial. And it never forgets the people. Society too often does. Keanu didn't just give a car. He gave a message. Status means nothing without service. And for one community, that gift wasn't about prestige. It was about hope. And hope in America is still the most powerful engine there is. At the press conference days later, there were no questions about movies, no gossip, no red carpet drama. The room was full, not with celebrity seekers, but with people who wanted to understand something that had become rare: integrity. Keanu Reeves stood at the podium, not as a movie star, but as a man whose actions had spoken louder than his fame ever could. The same silver crucifix rested gently on his chest, but this time it wasn't met with judgment, it was met with reverence. He didn't preach. He didn't scold. Instead, his words were steady and clear. Faith, he said, isn't a trend. It's not a filter or a fashion. It's not about what you wear around your neck. It's about what you carry in your choices. Then he paused, looked around the room, and added, "And if your faith makes others uncomfortable, maybe it's not your faith that needs adjusting, maybe it's the room." A hush fell, followed by thunderous applause. In a culture often distracted by surface, Keanu had struck something deeper, a reminder that what truly moves people isn't the roar of engines, but the courage to carry belief with quiet, unwavering grace. Across the world, the ripple effects began to take hold. In Sao Paulo, a Lamborghini dealership opened a small prayer and reflection room for customers and staff of all faiths. In Berlin, new hiring policies were introduced to embrace cultural inclusion. In Tokyo, employee training was rewritten to emphasize empathy and dignity. The movement had a name now: the Human Code, a global initiative for compassion-driven service. And its face? Lucia. Once invisible, now a leader, traveling from city to city, reminding executives and employees alike that greatness begins with how we treat the least among us. She didn't change the industry with noise. She did it with courage, truth, and the kind of leadership that grows from lived experience. Her voice, once silenced in the corner of a showroom, now filled boardrooms with purpose, because one man walked in wearing a cross, and they tried to push him out. But instead, he opened a door the whole world could walk through. And that's what we do here at Heroic Mission. We tell the stories that others overlook. If this story moved you, subscribe now, because dignity, faith, and courage should never go unnoticed again. Hit that subscribe button and join the mission.